Ethan Carter sat on the park bench with his hands resting on his knees. The evening sun touched the trees with a soft glow, and children were running across the grass with laughter filling the air. Ethan did not laugh. He only watched as if the world belonged to someone else and not to him. He was the head of a large company, known by many and feared by some, but he felt like a stranger to everyone. His suit was perfect, his shoes were polished, but inside he was tired. The bench was the one place where he could be alone without phones ringing or people demanding answers. He liked the silence even though it reminded him that his life was empty. He had built towers of glass and steel, but no one waited for him when the day ended. He had no wife, no children, no real friends. He told himself he did not need anyone, but the truth pressed on his heart every time he sat alone. While he looked at the ground, a little voice broke the stillness. A small girl with curly hair and bright eyes stood in front of him. She smiled without fear. Ethan blinked, unsure why she had chosen to speak to him. She held a small toy rabbit in her hand, and her shoes were a little worn from play. She looked at him and said, "You can be in our family if you want." Ethan froze. The words struck him in a way no business deal ever could. For a moment he thought he had heard wrong. A child he had never seen before had just invited him into her family, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. The girl tilted her head, waiting for his answer, then laughed softly as if his silence was funny. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not from sadness but from something he could not name. It had been years since anyone had spoken to him without asking for money, favors, or power. Before he could speak, a woman hurried toward them, looked to be in her early 30s with kind eyes and simple clothes. She took the girl's hand and said, "Lily, you should not bother people." The girl, now known as Lily, squeezed her mother's hand, but still looked at Ethan with the same smile. The woman turned to him and gave a small nod. "I am sorry if she disturbed you. She likes to talk to strangers too much." Ethan shook his head. "No, she did not disturb me." His voice was calm, but inside he felt something shift. The woman smiled politely and began to walk away with Lily, but the little girl turned her head and waved at him. Ethan lifted his hands slowly and waved back, watched them until they disappeared down the path. When they were gone, Ethan leaned back against the bench and closed his eyes. The park around him was the same, but he was not. A simple sentence from a child had broken through the walls he had built around his life. "You can be in our family if you want." The words echoed inside him, gentle yet powerful. He opened his eyes again and looked at the families around the park. Parents laughed with their children. Couples held hands. People belonged to one another. For the first time in years, Ethan wondered what it would feel like to belong to. The next evening, Ethan found himself walking to the same park bench. He told himself it was only for fresh air, but deep inside he knew he wanted to see the little girl again. The sound of children playing and the gentle rustle of leaves calmed him. He sat on the bench and watched, feeling less heavy than before. Not long after, he saw the small figure he had been hoping to see. Lily ran across the grass, her toy rabbit bouncing in her hand. Behind her came the same woman, moving at a steady pace with a smile that was both tired and warm. Ethan felt his heart beat faster in a way he was not used to. Lily spotted him and ran straight toward the bench. "You came back," she said with delight, as if she had known he would. Ethan gave a small nod. "Yes, I did." Grace reached them and gave Ethan a polite smile. "I see you met my daughter yesterday. She likes to make friends everywhere she goes." Ethan looked at her for a moment before answering. "She has a kind heart." Grace nodded and sat on the other side of the bench, watching Lily chase butterflies on the grass. For a while there was silence between them, but it was not the heavy kind of silence Ethan knew from his office. It was lighter, almost easy. Grace spoke again, her voice gentle. "You seem familiar, but I cannot place where I have seen you, if you live nearby." Ethan thought about giving his full title, about saying he was the head of a large company, but something in her eyes made him choose another path. He simply said, "I work in the city. I come here for peace." Grace smiled. "The city can be loud. This park is a good escape." They both watched Lily running with other children. Ethan felt his shoulders relax. He had never sat beside a woman who spoke to him without interest in his money or power. Grace treated him like a normal man, and that made him feel something he had not felt in years. Lily returned with her cheeks flushed from play. She sat between them and leaned against Ethan as if she had known him forever. Ethan was startled but allowed it. The little girl's trust filled a hollow space inside him. Grace laughed softly. She seems to like you. She does not do that with everyone. Ethan lowered his eyes, touched by the simple trust. I like her too, he said. They stayed together for a while, talking about simple things. Grace shared that she worked at a small bookstore nearby. She raised Lily on her own after her husband had left years ago. Ethan listened without judgment, and for the first time in a long while, he felt he wanted to know more about someone's life beyond his own. When the sky began to turn gold, Grace stood and held Lily's hand. We should go now, she said. Lily pouted, but obeyed. She waved to Ethan again. See you tomorrow, she said. Ethan felt a smile cross his face without him even trying. He lifted his hand and waved back. As they walked away, Ethan remained seated, his heart unsettled. The woman and her child had opened a door inside him that he thought was closed forever. He felt the pull of something invisible, like a thread tying him to them. He whispered to himself, I will come back. That night, as he returned to his large empty apartment, the silence felt even louder than usual. Yet for the first time, he welcomed the thought that maybe he would not always be alone. Ethan returned to the park again the next day. He tried to tell himself it was only for fresh air and rest. But his heart knew he was hoping to see Grace and Lily. He sat on the same bench, watching families walk by, feeling the strange pull of waiting. After some minutes, he saw Lily skipping toward him, holding her toy rabbit high in the air. Grace followed at her steady pace, carrying a small paper bag. Ethan felt a smile spread across his face before he could stop it. You came again, Lily said with joy, as if she had been expecting him. She climbed onto the bench without hesitation and sat close to him. Grace looked at him with kind eyes. I brought some bread. Lily likes to feed the birds. Would you like to join us? Ethan nodded. Yes, I would. They walked together to a quiet corner of the park where pigeons gathered. Lily scattered crumbs on the ground, laughing as the birds flapped and pecked. Ethan watched her with wonder, amazed by how simple moments could carry so much happiness. Grace sat nearby, her hands resting in her lap, watching her daughter with love. Ethan bent down and handed a few crumbs to Lily. She grinned and placed some in his hand, guiding him to throw them. For a moment, he felt like a child himself, caught up in her small world of joy. Grace spoke softly while watching them. You seem very patient with her. Not many men would sit like this and smile at crumbs and birds. Ethan looked at her. I never had moments like this when I was younger. My parents gave me everything money could buy, but never their time. I think I missed something important. Grace lowered her eyes, thoughtful. Time is worth more than anything else, she said. They fell silent for a moment, listening to Lily's laughter. Then Grace turned to him again. What kind of work do you do in the city? Ethan hesitated. He could have told her the truth, that he was a powerful CEO, but he feared it would build a wall between them, so he answered with care. I manage a company. It takes much of my time. Grace nodded. That sounds heavy. You must be very busy. Busy, yes, Ethan said, though his voice carried a note of weariness. Too busy sometimes. Lily ran back to them and held both their hands at once, her small fingers linking them together. You look like a family, she said with a bright laugh. Ethan froze. Grace's cheeks turned pink, and she quickly tried to distract her daughter, but the words had already touched Ethan deeply. Grace gave an embarrassed smile. My children say whatever comes to their minds. Ethan shook his head gently. Sometimes children see the truth better than we do. The afternoon passed with quiet conversation. They spoke of books, food, and the simple joys of life. Ethan found himself listening more than speaking, which was unusual for him. He felt no need to impress, no need to hide. Grace spoke to him as if he was just a man on a bench, not someone powerful or important. As the sky darkened, Grace stood and gathered Lily's things. We should head home, she said. Lily clung to Ethan for a moment, then let go with a wave. When they left, Ethan remained still. He felt something inside him that he could not name. It was like a thread pulling him toward them, invisible but strong. For years he had believed nothing could change the emptiness of his life. Yet with every word and every smile from Grace and Lily, that belief was fading. Walking back to his apartment that evening, Ethan looked at the tall buildings and shining lights of the city. They had once made him proud, but now they seemed cold. He thought of Lily's small hand in his and of Grace's gentle eyes. For the first time, he wondered if his life could hold something more than business and empty rooms. The days that followed carried Ethan back to the park again and again. He tried to tell himself it was by chance, but deep down he knew he was drawn there. Every time he sat on the bench, he hoped to see Grace and Lily, and almost every time they came. Lily now ran to him the moment she saw him, as if he were a part of her world. She talked about her toys, her school, and the stories her mother read to her at night. Ethan listened with full attention, something he never gave in his office meetings. He found himself smiling at her small jokes, feeling warmth each time she laughed. Grace grew less guarded with each passing day. She spoke more freely, sharing pieces of her life. Ethan learned that she had once dreamed of being a teacher, but life had taken another path. She now worked at a bookstore, raising Lily alone after her husband had walked away. Ethan felt respect for her strength. She carried herself with quiet dignity, never asking for pity or help. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped lower, Lily fell asleep on the bench with her head resting on Ethan's arm. Grace watched the scene with a look that was hard to describe. There was surprise, perhaps even hesitation, but also a softness that reached deep into Ethan's heart. Grace spoke quietly so as not to wake her daughter. "You were very gentle with her. She trusts you in a way she does not trust many people." Ethan looked down at the sleeping child. "She trusts because she is pure," he said. "I do not deserve it, but I will not break it." Grace studied him. "You speak as if you are carrying something heavy." Ethan hesitated. For a moment he wanted to share the truth of his life, to tell her about the long, empty nights, the endless hours at work, the shallow faces around him, but he held back. He feared that if she knew who he really was, she might step away. Instead, he said, "I have spent many years alone. I forgot how it feels to be close to someone." Grace lowered her gaze. "I understand that more than you think." The silence between them was not empty. It felt like a bridge slowly forming. Ethan felt something inside him, an invisible bond that grew stronger every time he sat with Grace and Lily. It was as if a thread tied his heart to theirs, unseen yet unbreakable. When Lily stirred awake, she reached out and took both of their hands at once. Her small fingers linked them together, and she smiled in her half-sleep. "We are like a family," she whispered before drifting back into dreams. Ethan's throat tightened. Grace's eyes glistened, though she quickly looked away. Neither of them spoke, but both felt the weight of the child's innocent words. That evening, as they parted, Grace gave him a smile that was softer than before. She said, "Thank you for spending time with us. Lily will not stop talking about you when we get home." Ethan replied, "I should be the one thanking you. Give me something I thought I had lost." When he walked back to his apartment, the city lights no longer seemed as bright. His office tower stood tall against the night, but it looked cold and distant. He thought of Lily's hand holding his, and of Grace's quiet smile. For the first time in many years, Ethan felt alive, as if his soul was being pulled toward a place it belonged. Ethan woke one morning with an unusual feeling of peace. The image of Lily holding his hand and calling them a family still lingered in his mind. He carried that memory with him into his office, but the moment he stepped into the tall glass building, the air changed. Phones rang, voices rushed, and the world of business swallowed him again. Inside the boardroom, his team waited with files spread across the table. They spoke about profits, mergers, and deals worth millions. Ethan listened, but his thoughts drifted to the park. He imagined Lily feeding birds and Grace smiling under the fading sun. The sound of laughter felt louder in his memory than the cold words of his managers. One of the partners, Richard Hale, noticed Ethan's silence. Richard was sharp, proud, and often mocking. He leaned back in his chair and said with a smirk, "You have been distant lately, Ethan. Is something more important than the company these days?" Ethan lifted his eyes and answered calmly, "Not everything is about numbers, Richard." Richard laughed, spoken like a man who is losing his edge. "Be careful. If you spend too much time with ordinary people, you may forget who you are." The words struck Ethan harder than expected. Ordinary people. He thought of Grace and Lily. There was nothing ordinary about the way they made him feel. They gave him something no business deal ever had, yet he stayed quiet, unwilling to reveal what mattered to him most. After the meeting, Ethan returned to his office. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed the wide city below, but instead of pride, he felt emptiness. His office was grand, yet it carried no warmth. He looked at the framed awards on the wall, the polished desk, the leather chairs, and he felt like a prisoner inside his own success. That evening, he went to the park again. Grace and Lily were already there. Lily ran to him, her small arms wrapping around his waist. Ethan bent down and lifted her gently, feeling the weight of something precious. Grace noticed the tired look on his face. "Long day?" she asked softly. Ethan gave a faint smile. "Long and loud. Being here feels different." They sat together on the bench while Lily played with her toy rabbit near the trees. Grace looked at him with concern. "You always seem calm, but today you look troubled." Ethan hesitated. He wanted to tell her everything, but fear held him back. He only said, "My world and your world feel far apart." Grace tilted her head slightly. "Maybe not as far as you think." Her words gave him a spark of hope, but it faded quickly when Richard's mocking voice echoed in his mind. "Ordinary people." Ethan worried that Grace might also think he belonged to another world, if she discovered his true position. As the sky darkened, Ethan walked Grace and Lily toward the edge of the park. Lily skipped ahead, leaving them a few steps behind. Grace spoke quietly. "I do not know much about you, Ethan, but I can see you are kind to my daughter. That matters to me more than anything." Ethan stopped walking for a moment, looking at her. He wanted to promise her that he would always be there, but the fear of losing her trust tied his tongue. He only said, "I am glad I met you both." When they parted, Ethan stood still, watching them walk away. The thread inside him pulled tighter, but at the same time he felt the shadow of his old world pressing harder. He knew a choice would come. Either he would remain the man of glass towers, or follow the invisible bond that tied him to Grace and Lily. The next week brought more weight on Ethan's shoulders. His company was preparing for the biggest deal of the year. Meetings filled his days and pressure filled his nights. Richard Hale reminded him again and again that the future of the company depended on him. The city looked at him as a man of power, but Ethan felt like a man standing on two roads. One road was the world he had always known. It was a road of wealth, tall buildings, and endless demands. The other road was new, fragile, but alive. It was the road where Grace and Lily waited with smiles, where laughter replaced numbers, and where love replaced power. One evening, Ethan sat at the long table in his office while papers and contracts lay in front of him. His lawyer spoke, but he did not listen. His thoughts were far away in the park. He saw Lily holding his hand and calling him family. He heard Grace's gentle voice, telling him that time was worth more than anything else. Suddenly his phone rang. It was Grace. He rarely received calls from her, and the sound of her name on the screen filled him with warmth. He answered quickly. Grace's voice was soft but uncertain. "I do not want to bother you, but Lily has been asking why you have not come to the park these days. She misses you." Ethan closed his eyes. "I miss her too," he said quietly. Then he added, "I miss you both." Grace stayed silent for a moment before answering. "We understand if you are busy. You live in a different world." Her words cut deep. Different world. The same thought that haunted him in the boardroom now came from her lips. Ethan wanted to deny it, but before he could speak, she said goodbye and ended the call. That night, Ethan could not sleep. He walked across his apartment, staring at the walls and the empty rooms. He realized that all the wealth around him meant nothing if Grace and Lily were not in his life. He thought of Richard's voice telling him to focus on business, but he also thought of Lily's innocent laugh and Grace's kind eyes. The next day, the deal was ready to be signed. The boardroom was filled with men in suits, papers stacked high, and pens waiting. Richard stood at the front, smiling with pride. All eyes turned to Ethan. This was the moment to secure more power and money. Ethan picked up the pen. His hand shook. He looked at the words on the paper, but all he saw was Lily's face. He heard her voice saying, "You can be in our family if you want." He set the pen down. Richard frowned. "What are you doing? Sign it." "This is the future of the company." Ethan stood slowly. "My future is not in this paper. My future is somewhere else." The room fell silent. Ethan walked out without looking back. For the first time, he felt free. He drove straight to the park, his heart racing faster than it ever had in any business deal. Grace and Lily were there, sitting on their favorite bench. Lily's eyes lit up when she saw him, and she ran to him with open arms. Ethan lifted her high, his heart full. Grace looked at him with surprise. "I thought you were busy today." Ethan set Lily down and faced Grace. "I was busy, but I made a choice. I walked away from it because nothing is more important than this. Nothing is more important than you and Lily." Grace's eyes widened, and her lips parted as if she wanted to speak but could not. Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady. "I feel as if something ties me to you, something stronger than anything I have ever known. I cannot let it go." Grace's eyes softened. For a long moment she searched his face, and then she smiled faintly. Ethan stood before Grace with his heart open. The park around them faded as he waited for her answer. Lily clung to his side, her small hand wrapped around his, smiling as if she already knew the truth. Grace's eyes searched his face. She had seen men walk away before, leaving promises behind them. She had carried the weight of raising Lily alone, and her heart feared to trust again. Yet there was something in Ethan's voice, something steady and real, that made her want to believe. "You left your work for us," she said softly. "Why would you do that?" Ethan looked into her eyes. "Because without you and Lily, I have nothing. I lived in rooms filled with glass and steel, but they were cold. With you, I feel alive. With you, I feel like I belong." Grace felt her breath catch. She saw no pride in his words, only truth. She looked at Lily, who was watching them with hope shining in her eyes. Grace's heart trembled, but slowly she let down her guard. She stepped closer and said, "Then stay. Stay with us." Ethan's chest lifted with relief, and a smile spread across his face. He knelt down to Lily's height and opened his arms. Lily ran into them with joy. She laughed and said, "You are part of our family now." Grace stood beside them, her eyes moist with tears she tried to hide. Ethan rose and gently took her hand. It was the first time they touched with intention, and the moment felt like the start of something sacred. The weeks that followed were filled with change. Ethan visited the park every day, not as a lonely man, but as part of something new. He joined Grace and Lily for simple dinners, walked them home, and read stories to Lily before bed. Grace watched as her daughter's laughter grew louder, and her own heart grew lighter. Ethan no longer lived only for his company. He began to balance his work, giving his time not to endless meetings, but to the people who mattered most. Richard mocked him at first, saying he was losing his sharp edge, but Ethan no longer cared. For the first time, money and power did not rule him. Love did. One evening they sat together on the same bench where everything had begun. The air was cool, and the stars were starting to shine. Lily sat on Ethan's lap, holding her toy rabbit, while Grace sat beside them. "Do you remember what you said the first day we met?" Ethan asked Lily. Lily nodded proudly. "Said you can be in our family if you want." Ethan smiled. "I want that more than anything." Grace leaned against him, her hand slipping into his. They sat in silence. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of peace. The invisible thread that tied their hearts was no longer fragile. It was strong, unbreakable, and full of promise. From that night forward, Ethan was no longer the solitary CEO on a bench. He was a father to Lily and a partner to Grace. He had found what years of wealth could never give him. He'd found a family. The story of his life had been rewritten, not by contracts or towers, but by the simple words of a child with a kind heart. And as he walked home with Grace and Lily hand in hand, he knew he would never be alone again.